So our speaker tonight is Dr. Keith Ashley. He's an archaeologist and associate professor of anthropology at the University of North Florida. His current research focuses on the indigenous peoples and histories of southeastern North America, particularly Florida, and he's actively involved in archaeological excavations with UNF students throughout northeastern Florida. And I want to say thank you for joining us, Keith, and I'll stop sharing and let you take it away.
Okay, great. All right, can you guys see that?
Yep, good to go.
All right, can you hear me? All right, great. Thank you, Jamie. I appreciate the invitation to speak. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is this project that we've been working on at the University of North Florida for the last 4 years. And it's really part of this broader project that we're doing called the Mocama Archaeological Project. And what we're trying to do here is really kind of reconstruct the social landscape of the late early 1600s by focusing on the indigenous sites. And really our approach is to kind of make this indigenous centered. Usually when people will start to talk about the contact in the historic period, really emphasis shifts to the Europeans and the Native Americans kind of move to the background. We really want to keep them front and center. This specific project I'm going to talk about, it really kind of came about in probably about 2018 or 2019. Someone after a meeting asked me, well, what is a Timucua town village? What does it really look like? And I said, well, you know, we don't really know. There are some kind of spotty and vague mentions in documents, and most of our excavations have not been broad scale. So I really kind of took that question to heart, and we decided, you know what, we're going to go ahead and try to open up large areas at a site. So I chose a site that we had started working on in 98 and 99. And that's a site called Sarabay. It's actually the Armelino site. So that's really what I'm going to be kind of talking about tonight. Just to kind of give you a social, landscape here, I'm going to be talking about the Timucua, and so they're kind of in the northeast Florida, southeast Georgia area. So they're a little bit east of the Appalachia, who are kind of the Panhandle area, and south of the Wally Indians, who are along kind of the central northern Georgia coast. And then immediately to the south would be kind of the East and Tucabaga, within your area, and then farther south would be the Calusa. So if we want to kind of zoom in now on the Timucua area, what we see is that there are dialects of Timucua that we know about. So really, Aaron Broadwell, who's at the University of Florida, is doing this really great research on the Timucua language. And he has about 200 pages of Timucuan corpus. So he's really starting to get some great information for us about the language. So there are these dialects, and the dialect in our area is Mocama. So it's maritime, or it means sea, S-E-A. I think he says it means kind of sea emphatically, so it's the sea. So that's the language or the dialect of Timucua that's spoken really extreme northeastern Florida into southeastern Georgia. And I think it does differ from the Timucuan language in St. Augustine, which is the saltwater dialect of the Agua Salada. So when I talk about Mocama, I'm just being kind of specific, a specific dialect of Mocama, of the Timucua, that's really in the Jacksonville area and into southeastern Georgia. So there it is, kind of located on the landscape right there. Just a couple things about the Mocama. From documents, we can see that they had hereditary leadership. So they had chiefs. The chiefs' names were Holada. So Holada was kind of their indigenous name for a chiefly leader position. But there also seemed to be some sort of honored council. So the chiefs or the Holada's power was probably tempered to some degree by this council here. And apparently there were these rank clans. We read from documents that the Holada usually derived from the Deer clan. So these are matrilineal societies. We know that they live in towns and villages. We kind of are trying to make a distinction here between a town and a village. And our main reason for that is if it has a council house, the main center, that's the political hub, we can refer to those as towns, and those outlying areas that kind of are tied to the towns but have a decent sized population, we see those as kind of villages. So in our area, the Mocama region, at the time of European contacts, we're talking the 1560s, there were really two primary kind of holatas. Satariwa, who's at the mouth of the St. Johns River, who's going to be very close to the site that we're working on. And the other was Takatakaroo, and Takatakaroo is kind of in the northern Mocama area. So he and his village would have been at the south end of Cumberland Island, Georgia. Also, just in terms of general economy, domestic economy, Hunting and gathering, we see that a lot in the middens, but we start to see for the first time small amounts of corn. We don't see great amounts. We see greater amounts later in time during the mission period, but early on we start seeing it. And one thing I think we've really done is we've dated a lot of corn. We've dated cob mark pottery, and it's pretty consistent when we look at like at this 2 sigma or 96, 97% probability, it's after 1450 AD. So the addition and growing of corn is a really late phenomenon here in northeastern Florida. And then I think there are a lot of kinship and interaction networks that are going on at this time. If you've heard me talk about another site that we work on called the Mill Cove Complex, where we have connections here in Jacksonville to Cahokia, to Macon Plateau, and really far-flung areas of the Southeast. We have all this great exotic material, whether it's copper and galena, various types of igneous rocks. That interaction has stopped. So we don't see that at this point in time. That ends about 1300. So from 1300 to European contact and shortly after, we really don't have those exotic items from far-flung areas. We are getting a lot of probably regional interaction, but not that really long distance interaction. And I think most of the evidence we have for interaction beyond our immediate area is not with the St. Johns River and to the south, but really to the Georgia coast and inland, kind of towards the Okefenokee swamp area. So that's really where the connections are. So what we have going on here is the first really formal or documented contact with Europeans is going to be with French Huguenots in 1562 for only 48 hours. And then they return in 1564. So they're here for 15 months. And this is what's known as the La Caroline colony. A lot of people refer to it as Fort Caroline. So this is only a 15-month colony. But within those documents, we see a couple of references here to a community, a village known as Sarabay. Sometimes it's spelled various ways. So in one instance, they talk about it being on an arm of the river to the north, which would place it kind of where we think we are. And they say the fields are just ripening with millet. They don't have a word for corn at that time, so it's mill or millet. In another instance, they say they go near the community of Sarabay to collect clay for bricks, okay? And also they say it's on an arm of the river. Then we also hear about several types of meetings that go on between French and kind of the leading Mocama Pilatus. And so these are the diplomatic meetings. In several of these, we see a reference to King Serenade. So we think all these little brief references are to a community and a person that is Sarabay. All right, so the French are kind of expelled in 1565, and we see the Spanish arrive. So the Spanish arrive, and they're going to be here until 1702. They established 2 missions in 1587. The first one is going to be at Alamacani, which is right here. So the site I'm going to talk about, the community that I'm going to talk about, is just the next island over. So Alamacani becomes San Juan del Puerto to the Spanish, and main Catacaru village right here, it becomes San Pedro de Mocama. So in 1587, what we have are 2 Spanish missions. And really what that means, there is a priest station at Alamacani at San Juan del Puerto, and a priest station at the Catacaru, San Pedro. So what we have are probably 2 Spaniards in this area in 1587, maybe 100, a little over 100 people, 35 miles to the south in St. Augustine. So this is really still an indigenous landscape. And the time period that I'm going to be dealing with is probably 1580s, maybe into the 1620s. So what we're hoping is this site that we're working on, Sarabay, is going to kind of give us an on-the-ground window into Mocama life and to village layout between 1580 and about 1620. So as the first couple of decades of kind of missionization proceeds, what it is, we get this letter that is written. So it's written by a priest now who's at Alamacani, who's at San Juan del Puerto. So this is 1602. And this is a 2-page letter that we have now. And it's basically a state of the affairs. He's writing to the crown saying, this is kind of what's going on. I'm converting all these natives to Catholicism. And I think we need to be careful about what conversion means. I think to the priest, if he basically just baptizes them, he assumes that they're converted. We don't know what conversion actually means to the indigenous peoples. So there he talks about that there are 10 communities surrounding him that he visits. So in Spanish parlance, those are referred to as visitas, but they're indigenous communities. And one of them that he mentions is Sarabay. And that is supposed to be the closest one to him, a quarter of a league away. So it's probably less than a mile. On the landscape today, we think we are pretty confident that of those 10 he mentions, we know where 4 of them are. We think we know where Alamacani is, which is San Juan del Puerto. We know where San Pablo is. We know where San Mateo is. We know where Veracruz is. And we think we know where Sarabay is. In fact, we feel most confident about Sarabay, and that's the site that we're working on. All right. Also, we have this map here. This map is crafted in 1705. And in the map, it shows the mouth of the St. Johns River, San Juan. And then we know for a fact, this is repeated over and over and over again, that the first island there, San Juan, is today's Fort George Island. We know that there's an island right here that is Santa Maria Island. We know unequivocally that that is today's Amelia Island. So we know that this island is Fort George Island. We know this island is Amelia Island. The really only logical island this could be, which says right here, Isle of Sarabay, is Big Talbot Island. All right. Also, if we go back 100 years earlier for this map, there was a pilot who was basically leaving from St. Augustine, and he was going to the Chesapeake Bay. And what he was doing was charting the coastline. So he was naming rivers, or at least reiterating the names of known rivers and islands. When he gets to the mouth of the St. John's, he refers to it as the Rio de San Juan. So the St. John's, first island he gets to is San Juan. The next island he gets to is Sarabay. The next island he gets to is Santa Maria. So we see this same layout 100 years earlier in a narrative by a pilot. So we feel really strongly, based on all this evidence, that Big Talbot Island is where Sarabay is going to be located. All right, so let's turn to some archaeology now. So in 1998, we had a state grant to do some work on Big Talbot Island. So at that time, we had a twofold objective was, hey, what's out there? Is there potential for a contact village to be out there, a Mocama Timucuan community? And there was also a shell ring that was 500 years earlier that we kind of wanted to relocate. So what we did that year, we did this large shovel test survey, and I'll talk about that. After the shovel test survey, we decided to, in 1998 and 99, to focus on an area that had a lot of pottery that suggests to us, hey, this could be that community of Sarabay. Then there was like a 20-year hiatus where I got kind of involved in other things, but I always remembered this site. So we came back in 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. So we've worked on this site for the past 4 summers. So this has been really part of the UNF field school system that we've had, you know, over the last 25 or so years. So if you look at how much we've done, so far we've done 169 units, 163 1x2s, 6 1x1. So that's like 332 square meters. But what's going to be really interesting is the overwhelming majority of this is restricted to a really small area, probably 40 by 60 meters. And one of them is going to be a really large block. So it's giving us some really good kind of on the ground kind of placemaking information. All right. So real quickly, I'll give you some background before our last 4 summers. 1998 is part of that grant I was talking about. We started to shovel test the area. So here is San Juan, today's Fort George Island. Here is Santa Maria up here, today's Amelia Island. And here in the middle is Big Talbot Island. Now, there is another island called Little Talbot Island, but that's mostly a recent formation. It was probably just a large sandbar, sand spit when the Spanish and French were here. So this is Big Talbot Island, which we really are going to argue is the Isle of Sarabay. So when we went out there in 1998, not much archaeology had been done. The state had gone out there in 1974, driven along the dirt roads, kind of walked around, picked up a few things. So they recorded a couple scattered sites, but the distribution was just based on where there was open areas for them to pick up a few things. So really nothing was known about the southern end of the island. So what we did with this grant is we did the shovel test. So we ended up doing about 550 shovel tests. At that time, this lot right here, and this one down here were all private lots. Since then, the state has acquired them and we've actually come in and filled in those areas. So right now our shovel test number is over 600. All right. So we analyze all this material. We're looking at distributions of different types of pottery. So for this talk, I'm going to stick to the distribution of pottery that's dating to indigenous pottery that's dating to the 16th and maybe early 17th century. So if we kind of remove the shovel test, this is what we have. So this little bit darker color right here, that represents, that's for all the shovel tests that produced pottery dating to this time period, okay, dating to the 15 and early 1600s. Then what these little darker brown areas represent, these are areas where we had clustering of shovel tests that had high amounts of that pottery. And the pottery that I'm talking about is right here. These are going to be the major players from a pottery standpoint that can kind of give us that time marker. San Pedro is what's made by the Mocama probably shortly prior to European arrival, and they probably continue making that until about 1600 or so. And then we see a shift to San Marcos. What's interesting, this shift to San Marcos, we see it among the Mocama here. We see it among the Wali to the north a little bit earlier. We see it among the Yamasee, and we see it among some of the other Timucuan communities. So we see this kind of wholesale shift from the indigenous type to another indigenous type that they're all making. So it's really hard for us to try to separate sites that have San Marcos. Are they Yamasee? Because Yamasees do move into this area. Are they Wali? Wali do move into this area. Or are they Timucuan? And what we think is we have a really nice example of an in situ transition from San Pedro to San Marcos. Don't let the names fool you. I know they're Spanish names, but these are clearly indigenous wares. So we had these high concentrations here of San Marcos or San Pedro, mostly San Pedro pottery. So we decided to excavate in those areas. So we chose this one here where the red one is, the red square is. So we did this in 98, 99. We haven't gotten out of this square. So we really haven't sampled these other areas through excavation. It's just been through shovel testing. But we have a lot of good information about this area right here, which we think is kind of centrally located. One thing that this does show us is that the settlement pattern here, the distribution of households, is not a really tightly clustered walled community like you see in some of the debris engravings, that they're really dispersed linearly, really probably along the salt marshes over kind of a larger area. All right, so we did our shovel test. We kind of have a distribution that's going on. So we started to do some units. So what's important right here, there's a blue tarp that's right here. This is one of the shovel tests we dug in 1998. When we dug it, we noticed kind of a stain in there that seemed unusual. So what we did, we decided, okay, we're going to continue with our shovel testing, but we're going to put a tarp in here, backfill it, and we'll come back to it when we can. So after we finished our shovel testing, this is one of the areas we earmarked for more investigation. So there it is. We're starting to enlarge it. So a 1x2 wasn't helping either. So we end up doing this larger block over 2 years. So the block measures probably roughly about 8 meters by 9 meters. All right. And the big thing that we recover in here, I mean, lots of indigenous pottery. We got Spanish olive jar. We have a few other things. But so this is probably about 50 centimeters down. So this is kind of the interface where we've just gotten out of the kind of the midden plow zone kind of area into the light yellow brown subsoil. But we started to get all of these really features showing up. And there were some pits here. There are fire pits. There are hearths. There are post holes. But what really stood out is this right here in this old wall trench. And our shovel test that I showed earlier had just clipped part of the wall trench. And I really think sometimes if that shovel test had been 15 centimeters to the west, we would have missed that trench. We may not even dug here. So everything that I talk about from now on, we may not have found. So archaeology is a game of inches. All right. So here it is kind of showing up in the photograph. You can see it kind of coming in right here. Okay, we think this may be a doorway. And here's the shovel test. And you see how we clipped it there. So right next to it, probably laying on the inside part of the wall, is we got almost a complete vessel. Now, part of the backside is missing because it was hit by a plow. So we found those pieces kind of spread out as the plow hit it and kind of moved it along. But this is a nice San Marcos vessel. It appeared to be laying right up against the inside part of the wall. This is a nice scabbard tip. So this is Spanish. So this would have been, the finial, the end to a sheath, whether it's a dagger or a sword. So some of the things that we were finding here seemed kind of maybe high status. So we started to think, could this be an elite resident or some sort of special residence? Because really, we don't get wall trench structures very often here. All right. So that was it. So we finished that in 98 and 99. So there is the block that we did AB, and that's kind of letting you know the structure. So we just had maybe a little less than half of it in the unit. There were large trees that really precluded us from expanding in the other direction. So we just kind of interpolated, and it's probably 18, maybe 20 feet in diameter. So it's located right there. So when we came back in 2020, I really thought maybe this is a good area. Let's try to expand a little bit more. So in 2020, we got ready to do the summer field school, but the pandemic hit. So we had to cancel it. But the university allowed us in the fall to do kind of a modified field school, much smaller, 3 days a week, wearing masks, social distancing. So we did that. So we came in the fall and we started working on this new trench. We're calling it Block C. If you can see these units right here, a 1x1 and a 1x2 in orange, they were also dug at the time we dug this one, AB in 98 and 99. There's kind of a really heavy shell area there. So we dug there. The problem is this was pre-GPS, or at least GPS, we didn't have it. So I was going off a fence at an angle. And when we first started this unit, I was thinking this test would be right here and we'd be just to the side of it, but we were a little bit off and we actually found it. So that's even better. So now we know exactly where that one was. All right. So this is us starting to kind of work in 2020. So we're beginning to dig. We're actually working in Big Talbot Island State Park. So it's a heavily wooded area. The state was great. They came in, they helped us to clear things and made sure that we weren't clearing, any kind of vegetation that was endangered. And so we started to clear this area. We're digging this block in kind of 1x2 meter sections. So here it is. As you can see it, you can see these two trees and this one right here, here and here, and here they are right here. So right down here at this end is where we basically encountered the previous unit that we had dug in 98 and 99. All right. So then we came back. So we finished that field school. We came back the following summer. So everything was backfilled. So what we did, here's 98, 99. Here's 2020. We added to the north of our 2020 Block C. And then we opened up a Block D and a Block E. So we're still in the same area and we're really expanding out. All right. So then we come to 2022. So here we've gotten some features that I'm going to show you all at once, but we've expanded. So now this kind of salmon colored right here is being extended. So we're adding more and more to this. So this Block C is getting really, really large and producing a lot of great kind of spatial information for us. So this is after this past summer. So here we are with the light blue. So the light blue now is the last. So this is kind of it. So we're in an area 60 by 40, but if you really look at the majority of what we're doing is in this big Block C. And this is only a short distance away. This is maybe 10 meters at the most. So we're getting all this really good information. And we think mostly what we have is probably dating to the 1580, 1620 range. Yeah, we're getting a little bit of artifacts that date a little bit earlier, not many, but some. And then we're also getting some plantation era materials, but not many at all either. So this is where we have the structure, and this is where we are from. All right. So just some photographs. It's always great to show students. I have great students here at UNF. Following the pandemic year, which would have been 2021, we had 26 people in the field school, which is the largest field school we've ever had. I think people were kind of tired of being cooped up and they wanted to get outside. So we really benefited from that. But even the last couple of years, we've had 18 to 20 people in it. So we've been able to really move a lot of dirt. So here you can see students kind of getting down to the interface. And in some of these areas, you can see kind of stains coming into play. Sometimes we'll map them all and plan. Sometimes they turn out to be just uprooted trees, dips in the plow zone, gopher tortoise burrows, but in other instances, they are cultural. So hopefully you can kind of make this out. So this is looking at just Block C. And so this is looking at Block C with 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023 in play. So this is kind of looking at that interface area, and these are all the features or stains that we're seeing. So the ones here that are in kind of a gray shading, those represents ones we think are postholes, okay? Just to try to illuminate this a little bit more, I'm gonna show these blue dots where we have these really nice posts. Hopefully this will kind of really start to show a pattern to you. Now we have one off to the side here, and then now we have these over this area here. So we have this kind of circular arrangement here. Some of these are just incredible postholes. They're clearly postholes. They're not trees or something else. They have really, you'll get to see some really great profiles. And there's one more. All right, so it could be looking something like this, maybe something like this. Early on, we underestimated its size. So we're now looking at probably something in the 60, 70 foot diameter range. We also tried to focus on this area here. If it is something like a council house, it may have had a central fire. So we are getting this larger kind of stain that was right in here. We also got this really great feature at the end of the 2022 field season. So here we have this really large pit, and it's about a meter in diameter, and it's also about a meter deep. We also got the, and I'll show close-ups of those. We also got this unusual feature right in here, which was really kind of about 2 meters in diameter, so like a donut, like a trench. And once we took out the trench fill, we end up getting 4 posts within that. So we have these really great array of features that are out there, and the overwhelming majority of features are producing either San Marcos or mostly San Pedro pottery. So we're getting very little that's really any of the earlier periods or anything that looks like it's plantation or historic. So here are some of the post holes in profile. So you can see in a lot of these, we have this little basin-shaped kind of opening to it, and then the nice little post mole itself. So you see one here, you see another one here, you can see another one here. Here are students just drawing them first and plan. You guys probably know the routine where once we expose them, we draw them and plan. Everybody's looking down on them. We photograph them, record them in various ways, and then we cut them in half. One half we take out and we decide, we screen that half in the field. Then with the other half that would be in place here, we're taking samples for fine screen recovery back in the lab. And then just a few more. So again, you can see these larger kind of basins here that are leading into them. This one here, I think we clipped it in another direction, but it's on the other side. So we have these really nice, deep post holes that suggest really kind of a substantial kind of structure. Here's that pit that I was talking about. So it's coming in over here. You can see it really clearly. We have a tree here that's creating a problem, and there's a root there, so we couldn't get the rest of it. It's pretty much coming in right there. This is one of our students, Gabby. Gabby's probably 5'10", so you can see how deep this is, and you can see it nice in there, and they're drawing it. It had, I think, 5 shark teeth, and what's interesting, there's 3 different species of shark teeth represented, so it's not like it's all from the same shark. This right here is a gannet, so it appears to be the entire wing of a gannet, and gannets are kind of more offshore birds there. We see them get them on the islands and so forth, but that's really nice, and it was up near the top. We're getting lots of pottery in it. We're getting various types of animal bone, deer, fish, and the like. That's not all. These are just kind of little samples of what was coming out of it. So since we've just finished our 4th season in the field, we're still going through a lot of this. So a lot of the really good interpretations are going to be more to come in the future. Here's the other unique feature we got just this past summer. So you can see it really stands out really well. It's this nice little almost square, a rounded square, a circle. Then after we take the trench-like material out, you can see there's a post hole, there's the other post hole, there's the other post hole. We've already kind of been working on it here as well. So there's 4 post holes contained within there. So if this is contemporaneous with the arrangement of posts, it's inside of it. Okay. So we're really not really sure where to go with interpreting it yet. There really wasn't a whole lot in the trench, scattered, a little bit of scattered bone or scattered pottery, really nothing in the post molds themselves. So trying to project it out, interpolate between all the posts we have, we're looking at something that could be 60 to 70 feet in diameter. We're really talking with all the archaeologists in this area and other archaeologists that are familiar with kind of either Timucuan or southeastern Indians. No one really knows what could be this large other than a council house. So we're leaning towards that it's possibly the council house. What we're wondering, do we have a council house? Do we then have maybe an elite's residence? Are we in the center, of the community? So this is the council house at San Luis, which would have been 3 to 4 times the size of what we have here. What's interesting, a couple passing references to mission period council houses along the Atlantic coast. Usually say they're about 50 to 60 feet in diameter. So this is pretty much comparable to that. So council houses, they would have been the center of the community. These would have been politicized and ritual spaces within the community. Here, ceremonies would have occurred, political discussions, maybe in recreation. What's really interesting is that these continue even after the Spanish arrived, even in places where the Spaniards established missions. They don't build missions and have indigenous people come to them. They get permission to build a church and a convento, a place for a friar to live in an indigenous community. So those continue. So you would have the church, you would have the convento, but you would also still have the council house. They still have authority with regard to politics. But again, remember, we're in a community here, Sarabay, that doesn't have a priest living there. There's a priest living on the other island. He may visit periodically, but he's not there. And that priest in the adjacent island, he's the only Spaniard for 30 or so miles. All right. Real quick, to start looking at some of the artifacts here, we've made it through 2020, 2021, and 2022 analysis. We're just starting this past summer's analysis, so those don't factor in. So we're looking at about 11,000 sherds. We don't analyze sherds if they're under 2 centimeters. We'll count them and we'll weigh them. So if we took those into account, it's probably closer to 22,000 fragments of indigenous pottery. So you can see that San Pedro and San Marcos really dominate. The others would be some St. Mary's, which is just the previous time period, 1250, 1450. There's some St. John's that dates to about 1,000. That's about it. There's also probably some sand temper, grit temper, and grog temper that probably fit in with San Pedro and San Marcos. They're just kind of outside the norm. So we really have a strong kind of Mocama component. All right, and this is our San Pedro pottery. If you're not familiar with it, it's not the most aesthetically pleasing pottery to look at. It's really got these roughened surfaces. So it's either cob mark, textile impressed, cord mark, or some other roughened surface. We will see it, stamped. The check stampings are usually really big. They seem to be really crudely carved. Same thing with complicated stamping. Another common feature we see is that once they roughen it or even stamp it, a lot of times they'll obliterate it in areas, but sporadically and randomly. So you'll see these streaks here in which it has been kind of smoothed over almost to the point of burnishing. And what's interesting, we see the same characteristic among the Plutano pottery, the Alachua pottery of the same time period. So this obliteration that's going on. This is grog temper, it's sherd temper. So you can see these big, really fragments of broken pieces of pottery in it. The other type we mentioned is San Marcos. San Marcos is really nicely made. It's paddle stamped. It does have this fill-foot cross, even though the curvilinear element, which is part of the earlier Irene pottery type, has really dropped out. So it's really going to be more these straight lines that are here. But sometimes we still get that central dot right there. You can see it in this one here. You can see it in this here. So we get this line block stamping. We'll get cross stamping. We'll get incising. These are nice little rims here, more incisions here, some punctations. So really nice. We occasionally get it complicated stamp, this nice little kind of concentric or this spiral that's here. Other times we get concentric circles with bullseyes. A few more. A lot of times we get it where it's just overstamped. So you can see it with these little kind of knobbies there from the overstamping. But we got all this kind of great rim treatments here. Sometimes they have these appliques, or these, people call them poles, but little strips that they place there. These here are pinched. These here are some sort of hollow tool, whether it's a bird bone, or a lot of people say that it's some sort of cane. Again, there's another version of it. We'll get a lot of these really nice. That complete vessel that I showed earlier had those little punctated rim appliques. And then we get some more punctations and incisors. We're getting colonial wares. So colonial wares are indigenous made, okay, but they're in European vessel form. And typically these are just found, or most of them, they're mostly found at more of the mission sites. Okay, we're getting close to 50 of them. So what it is your indigenous made, but it's a European form. So we're getting plates. A lot of these are plate marleys or brims. So they have these kind of brim bowls that are coming out that are really plates. And that top brim part is really slipped in red. So these are slips, they're not a glaze. So we see them here. We get large handles. This is probably a handle to like a pitcher. This is going to be more of a mug handle. So here's some more of these red. Here's some more of the handles. Here's more of that kind of brimmed area here. So we're getting these, and I think the number we're getting is surprising. A lot of people were thinking, hey, these are mainly at the missions, and this is mainly being made for priests who want some of the comforts, even though they're supposed to be living, a life of kind of poverty. We're getting lots of, more traditional indigenous tools. We're getting lots of welt, basic welt, pounding and cutting tools. We're getting scrapers, spoches, things like that, out of clams. We're getting perforated bimbos here to arcs. We're getting a small number of beads, whether they're polyamella beads or whether they're beads that are this shape coming from probably the outer world. So we have a nice little collection of, again, here are some more, just a variety of the welts. These are nice little pendants. So these are the ends, this ends of welts. And you can see where they have been grooved here, probably for suspension. This one's burned. So we have two of them here that are really nice. European materials. So again, we're getting a nice little collection of European materials. Spanish olive jar, I think we're up to, over 100 now. So we're trying to get those final numbers in. So sometimes you see where it's not glazed, other times we'll see it where it's nice glazed green. So we're getting some really large pieces. We get a couple of mouth pieces as well. We also have a few pieces of what's known as Mexican red painted ware. So this is being made in Mexico and it's coming over with the Spanish. So I think we have, 4 or 5 pieces now, but it's really nice little red ware. Got this painted black on it, nice little white dots. So we are getting a nice collection here. Again, I think that these are acquired by the indigenous people, whether through trade, whether through payment, whether through theft, however it might be, but they're basically utilizing within, framework. This is not, meant to be used as any kind of measure of a corporation or anything like that. We've got a few pieces of glass. We're also getting majolica. So right now we've gotten just early types of majolica that are usually pre-1640. So I think this is going to be Columbia white, and these are going to be San Luis blue on white. We'll also have one Sevilla blue on blue. So these are more tableware, so they're more of a refined ware. That would have been plate, have some features as well. The olive jar is more of a Mediterranean kind of ware. Sometimes the colonial wares maybe majolica forms. We got 2 really nice indigenous pipe bowls. This one here is the front part of one bowl. You can see a little spur there. It's got a nice little incised motif to it, kind of these concentric rectangles here. This one here is a type that Dennis Blanton has really recorded. And this is an effigy. I wish we had more of this. What we have here is more the back side of the pipe bowl. Here's where the stem would have gone in. But this is an effigy of a human face. This is actually the ear right here. That would have been probably an ear gauge right here, some sort of ear ornament. And then this part that's missing around here would have been the face. So really would have been nice to have that entire room. We're getting corn. Like I said before, really not in incredibly large quantities. When we get to the mission sites, when we get to a little bit later in the 1600 mission sites, we can get larger amounts of corn. but we do have a few cobs. We have some cupules. We have dated them. And basically all our dates are coming back pretty much the same. We got a couple really nice ones that are really tight that are probably suggesting late 15th, late 16th, early 17th. I don't know if you can make this out. This is one of our unusual finds here. This is a St. John's shirt. And I don't know if you can see it here. I'm going to use Photoshop and not liberally to use it, just trying to trace out what's carved in there. And you should be able to see it here, but this one here kind of shows it. And it's clearly these crosses that are here. So you can see one here and looks like they're working on another one. On the other side, I wish I had a photograph of that side, I should. It's kind of a circle. And in the circle, they've made these little slices of pie, which look a lot like these right here. It's like they're practicing on the other side. So this is a really kind of unique find that we have. This is not from here, but this kind of shows that kind of style of cross. This was found at Gualakini, which is a later mission site on an adjacent island, probably 60 to 70 years later. So I don't want you to think that was found here. I just want to show that that's kind of the style. This is our other incredible find that students were able to really capture this without destroying it. This is really incredibly thin piece of shell. And so what you have, this may be a cockle or an arc, but these here are the natural growth lines here. This part of it actually has been kind of filed down and smooth. And then they have this little central area and then these little radiating lines coming out. This probably the cross that's partly broken. This appears to be a suspension hole. So in talking to Catholic scholars, they really thought that this was a monstrance, either a pin or a symbol. And this is a big part of the Catholic Mass during the Catholic adoration, where they're taking the Eucharist, which is the host, and there's becoming the spirit of Jesus. So that's supposed to be representing the host that has been consecrated, and then we have the rays showing God's presence within it. So again, I think we have something that is really Catholic image, but I don't think we should necessarily say, "Oh, that means they're Catholic." Okay, a lot of times Indigenous people kind of graft certain onto their own system, utilize them in various ways. We got our first bead this summer. So finally, I can tell somebody that, yes, I've found gold. So this is a gold gilded glass bead that's coming in from Spain. And this is one of our big finds we got this summer. This is a religious medal, a Catholic medal. So this is the obverse, reverse, the front and the back of the same one. This is really small. So this is really tiny, but you can see the habit that she's wearing. You can see the cross right in here. On the backside, you can see the halo, and this individual is holding a baby. So we, again, we're relying on some Catholic scholars, Timothy Johnson at Flagler College and some of his colleagues. They feel really confident that this is Saint Teresa of Avila. And what's really interesting for us is she's canonized in 1620. And so there may have been this really big production of them right shortly after her canonization, and we're kind of receiving that here. So I think this is letting us know that the site that we're working on is continuing into the 1620s. We know that the last community outside of San Juan del Puerto kind of closes down, is abandoned. Some people may leave the area, some move to San Juan in 1628. So this is probably lingering on to close to that time as well. So to try to summarize some of the stuff here, the site that we're working on, the name of it is the Armelino site. And we are really, really, really confident now that it is the community that we see in the Spanish and French documents, spelled various ways, of Sarabay. I've always thought this, and I've always kind of hedged my bets and said, "Oh, yeah, I think so, probably." But I feel really, really confident to say it now. We think it's a broadly dispersed community. That's spread out over large areas. So I think anyone needs to move away from any idea that these villages are really tightly clustered and they've got this big wall around them. That doesn't match any kind of archaeology that we have. We think corn is a late addition here. The dates that we're getting are pretty consistent, not just here, but at other sites, that it's 1450 or later. We think that San Marcos pottery, which is an indigenous pottery that we see the Wally converting to, the Yamasee converting to, and some of the other Timucuas along the coast, as well as the Mocama. We think we see it happening here in place around 600. We are getting European kind of materials. We have lots of good features. We have both a wall trench structure and a visual post in the ground large structure. We're really thinking that we might be in the center of the community. Let me just go back real quick to this. So this is the structure we have. Here's the larger one. The shovel testing, what is interesting, there is not a lot in this area right here, particularly dating to this time period. So, another thing we're wondering, if this could be potentially a council house, could this opening, more cleared area be the plaza area? So in kind of looking forward, what we have is just so much information that's focused on this one area. We don't know how that differs from other areas of the site. So what we really need to do moving forward is to start help our domestic areas away from here and get artifact samples from there, get faunal samples from there, try to get architectural samples from there to see if this really does stand out and is really different from other areas of the site. So that's part of our future goal, not to be so myopic with this one area, move out and start looking at other areas of the site. I think I'm kind of to my time limit. So I just have so many people to thank. The state park, Talbot Island State Park, as well as the National Park Service. They work in unison on things. Even though we're a national state park right now, they're always great and supportive. We have the Friends of Talbot Island State Park, who has provided us with some funding. We have the Timucuan Parks Foundation, who's also been out there helping us with funding or with other things. North Florida Land Trust, one of the families out there, the Boardman family. But really, most of all, it's the students. I say this a lot, is I get to be the mouthpiece for this great archaeology that these students do. They work incredibly hard, and sometimes I don't really think they realize the impact and the contributions that they make during their summer here as they move on with their lives. So that's all I have. If there's any questions or anything, let me know.
Thanks, Keith. That is such interesting work you have going on, and I'm just so impressed by those units. Just such great looking large scale units. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, we find it's easier to type them in the chat, just so it's a little less chaotic. But if you are really set on unmuting yourself and asking a question, that's cool too. We already have a question in the chat from Rachel. She said, "This was wonderful. You said you might have a council house. Just curious, what other evidence would you look for and expect to help solidify this interpretation?"
Well, yeah, I think the biggest thing we're working on is size. So we do need more kind of confirming or corroborating evidence. I think the center part that we had, in the ones that we've seen in the documents or we've read in the document, there seems to be some sort of central fire within them. So we should expect to get either thermally altered sand, a lot of charcoal or something like that. And in one of those central units, we did have a feature that was showing up like that. So we're hoping to, that would be expand that area. Also in the one in San Luis, they have benches around the interior. So we should see those large posts, but we should see maybe a concentric ring of smaller posts within that. So that's another thing we'd like to try to look for, even though those may be smaller scale and they could have been impacted by our plowing. So we'd hope to find kind of more internal features that would strengthen it.
Awesome, thank you. And then Linda asked, how far apart were the posts of the council house?
Roughly about 2 meters, maybe 210, roughly averaging about 2 meters apart. And we're looking at that most of them were probably 50 to 60 centimeters. In the holes were larger, but probably the post parts and really the dark core parts are probably in the 50 centimeter range in diameter.
All right, if anyone else has any questions, feel free to type them away or unmute. I'll ask a question. So I know your focus is kind of this specific area in the time frame, and you mentioned, kind of broadening out. Did you mention earlier that there's a shell ring at the site? And I was just wondering, how deep the island was occupied and if it was maybe continuous, or that's future work?
Yeah, so we've actually done work that's called the Grand Shell Ring. So that's what we call St. John's 2, and that's really my period of interest. So St. John's 2, we've just done Bayesian stuff. So we think we can say a little bit tighter, 940 to 1300. So that's St. John's 2. So that if you've heard me talk about Mill Cove, that's that time. The Shell Ring is also that time. So it's about 250 years earlier. So what we think we have there is there was a large community that was there probably from about 900,000 to maybe 1300. Then what we have after that is these really small sites all over the islands. So between 13 and 1450, it's a different kind of pottery in these really small sites all over the place. Then all of a sudden, it seems to be concentrated again, and we get the Sarabay community. So we have it's really not a real deep history because the island itself, or at least the southern part of the island, probably isn't that old. So I think we have stuff maybe going back a little bit, going back to Deptford, so maybe, 300 BC. But really, there's strong occupation where we are in the south end of the island, about 1,000 until after European contact. Shell Ring's great. It's a Grand Shell Ring.
Okay. Was there any significance in the post holes facing east, west, or any specific direction?
No, but it did look like most of those basins were coming in from kind of the north south there. Because one of them we just happened to clip it in another direction. So we only really got the post until we got to the other side. So the basins seem to be mostly on the kind of the south side of the post.
Okay, thanks for that question, Dennis. Oh, I was interested also if you had a working hypothesis on maybe the markings on the San Pedro pottery and how they're kind of smudging the designs. If you had any.
No, it's just strange. It's just as haphazard. It's not continuous. So sometimes on one of them you can see it's like a large section is gone. It's smoothed over, almost burnished. Others, they're like these little streaks. And when you look at the Alachua pottery in the Gainesville area, that's the Botano pottery, it has that same thing that's going on. So I'm not sure exactly why they're doing it. Sometimes it's kind of smooth, other times it's burnt. So it's usually not the entire thing. There's always some little remnant of it still there.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
It is.
Rachel has another question. For that squarish feature, any idea if the post holes and trench fill are contemporaneous, or was the trench filled in at a later date?
Now, I think in terms of that one feature itself, I think that 2-meter trench, meter diameter trench, and those 4 posts, they're all contemporaneous. The thing we're trying to figure out is, are they contemporaneous with the actual larger ring of posts? They appear to be within it. I think it's gonna be hard to kind of establish precise contemporaneity. Some have suggested could it be one of the, it's supposed to have some sort of corn crib that was a communal corn crib, but I wouldn't expect to have that inside. We know that there were platforms, or at least we're led to believe through some of the writings that there are various types of platforms within the council house, and the highest platform is where the holata sat. So I don't know if that would be a platform. I don't know. If anyone has any good ideas, you're open to.
All right, sounds good. And then we have another question from Linda. Was there a burial mound associated with the village on the island?
Well, one thing that we're learning, we don't excavate or go near burials or anything like that. But one thing we can look at is that I think in our area, they stopped actually constructing burial mounds, mortuary mounds, probably about 1300. What we see happening is elites within these communities in the 1500s are co-opting earlier mounds and placing elites in there. So we're seeing these intrusive burials of elites within these probably centuries old mounds. So we have ones that have been dug deep in the past by people in which we get these really incredible burials that are dating to this time period. It looks like they are basically making a connection to their ancestry, and they seem to be exclusive. And that probably everyday burials are happening around house.
Thank you, definitely. All right, well, I don't see any other questions coming in, so I think we'll call it a night. And I just want to say thank you again, Keith, for joining us and sharing your research. It's awesome. Some great compliments in the chat for you, but it was great having you.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Take it easy.
You too.